Today, I will tell you a story about a story. One that entertained me and disappointed me, one that got a high rating and no love. Joseph Edward Abercrombie, more widely known with the significantly less epic but more popular name Joe Abercrombie, is a fantasy author and a film editor famous for writing some of the staples in the grimdark genre. Chances are, if you are here, you know why he is considered to be one of the best modern fantasy authors by many popular media outlets and by some arguably less popular booktube personalities, present company included. Leaving literary awards and nominations aside, this British gentleman has reached the highest praise a living author can hope for, being asked to write a generic one-liner on the cover of some other writer's new book. Now, I could go into detail about how awesome Joe Abercrombie's work is, but again, chances are you are already familiar with the First Law trilogy and its successor Age of Madness, both talked about on this channel not nearly enough, and they won't be today either. Instead, we'll take a closer look into his most recent publication, The Devils, which I will admit I had no plans to discuss further initially, but here I am, 2 months after I finished it, still hot and bothered. Mostly bothered. So, sit back, relax, and get ready for a whole lot of complaining with a twist ending. The Devils came out in May of 2025, and the reason why it was so exciting to me is twofold. Number one, it is set outside of the First Law world, which up until now was the only world the author had written in, with the exception of one other trilogy, the significantly less popular but still excellent Shattered Sea, or so I'm told. I haven't dabbled in this particular trio just yet. The second reason the release of The Devils was a big event in this faint booktuber's heart is that it was the first major release by the author in 4 years, and while Joe Abercrombie measures decently well on the scale from Patrick Rothfuss to Brandon Sanderson, it is still a rare enough event when he releases some fresh pages, so whatever he puts out there immediately makes it to my most anticipated books of the year list. And yet, for weeks after I read it, I've been feeling sort of deflated and mildly pissed off, which is a bit strange considering that I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, wouldn't you say? So, after pondering uselessly for 2 months, I think I finally have my answers, and being who I am, I will now generously yell them at you. Also, please keep in mind that part of the content to follow is rather spoilery, aimed more towards those of you who have already read the book and wish to discuss their thoughts and feelings. I will try to timestamp all the spoilery places if you wish to avoid them entirely, but still, you have been warned. Now that I have droned for half an eternity already, let's talk about the book. And I'm gonna start a bit backwards by telling you my conclusion first. The story is good, but in this case, good is not good enough. So let's break it down. Welcome to Europe! Yes, you heard that right. The setting for The Devils couldn't be more different than the one for the First Law. I mean, it could be, but you know what I mean. And that's a good thing. This version of Europe is new, fresh, fun, and exciting, which in terms of Joe Abercrombie's perspective simply means a different kind of terrible. It starts off as a warped, twisted, and corrupted take on somewhat historical events, though it's not as dark as the imagine hell on the cheap, then add more porridge of the First Law world, though there's definitely the potential. From the first scene depicting the holy city of Rome, the author hits you with tons of thematic possibilities. The sanctimony of the church, the squalor of the masses, the peculiarity of the unknown. It is basically opposite day all day long in this new old Europe and this non-Vatican holy city. In a nutshell, the Pope is a 10-year-old girl, and the Catholic clergy is now comprised of boss babes, among other things. And while the world is fun to explore and is definitely one of the strong suits of the book, in my opinion, it underperforms in 2 particular aspects: the overuse of magic and the quick reveals to shocking events without the necessary build-up. The former gave the characters an escape from jail for free card in almost all situations, effectively diminishing the magnitude and mystery of the existence of magic, making it seem almost mundane, while simultaneously reducing the stakes to almost no stakes. And the latter completely eradicated eradicated any mystery related to the grittiness of this version of Europe that might have otherwise played on the imagination of the reader. The author readily provided answers to some of the question marks related to both the worldly and the otherworldly, strangely often in the form of comedic relief. And while both of those separately might be considered flaws only born out of personal preference, the combination of the two makes it all kind of mediocre in all aspects but one: the cinematic spectacle. Put a pin in that, we'll discuss it more later. As any self-respecting Joe Abercrombie fan knows, nothing else matters if the characters and the dynamics between them are on point. Hell, the plot of the book might be a group of desperate losers tries to plant a zucchini garden, and Joe Abercrombie will find a way to make it entertaining with the right set of desperate losers, that is. So, safe to say that the expectations here were the highest and the room for disappointment the broadest. And before I dive into each of the main characters individually, let me dish out a bit of the premise of the book to set the stage. We follow a group of misfits called the Church of Holy Expediency, the 13th chapel of the Catholic Church, responsible for those deeds that cannot be done using conventional methods. Imagine Suicide Squad, the Vatican edition, a special ops team that any self-respecting pope would vehemently deny any connection to. As such, the Church of Holy Expediency is allowed the use of all kinds of monsters, dark magic, and ungodly methods in general in order to achieve its latest task, namely to bring a long-lost princess to the sort of vacant throne of Troy. Enter the devils. Alex is the closest thing we get to a protagonist, meaning that the plot revolves around her story, starting as a lowly thief and aiming at the throne of an empress of all things. I guess the author was so hell-bent, no pun intended, on making the other devils unique and interesting that he was left with nothing but vanilla taste for Alex. Or else he was thinking that we're so used to the deranged, broken, and twisted that to present us with a straightforward rags to riches story is in a way a novelty. It is worth mentioning that Alex's chapters felt the most YA-ish in the entire book, and while the same could be said for parts of some of the other characters' arcs, in her case it was the most irritating. She was more focused on her romantic trepidations while successfully being a useless sack of plain white rice for the most part of the main adventure. Brother Diaz more or less followed a similar arc to that of Alex, both of them technically not being a part of the devils, and both of them overcoming their troubled past in order to emerge as something better than their previous mistakes. Allegedly. But while being the designated leader of the group and mentor to the soon-to-be Empress, he is a bit too unconvincing as either in the beginning and rather too convincing by the end, going from a useless appendage to a superhero way too quickly. And besides the mad Microsoft Excel skills displayed towards the end of the book, which had me reeling, and the so essential to the plot priest to werewolf boning, Brother Diaz and Alex could have easily been the same character, and the book wouldn't have suffered for it one bit. This is where we both meet potential and destroy the excitement of the book simultaneously. We have a soldier combining the experience of ages, cursed with immortality, following the devils willingly because of some secret personal motivations. And while Jacob had the setup of a really interesting character, the nature of his skills and the limitations of his background, meaning the various oaths he took, make him very repetitive very quickly. His constant grumbling about the pain that he's in and his tortured sort of Logan Ninefinger-like lifelong regrets are very comfortable to read in the first half of the book, but become a drag by the second. The plot doesn't help either, as literally 3 out of 4 supposedly deadly encounters are resolved in the exact same way, with Jacob simply not being able to die and his opponents conveniently forgetting that. So his move is basically always the same: falls painfully on one sword and then promptly sticks his enemy with another while they monologue diabolically about some nonsense or other. How am I supposed to be excited about any of this? Baptiste is the quintessential jack of all trades, an adventurer, a pirate, a swashbuckler, whatever that means, an opportunist, and generally a woman of remarkable talents. She is never the point of view, but somehow always there to fill the gap with some random generic but very useful skill ranging from sailing to grave robbing. In contrast with the other devils, there is allegedly nothing supernatural about her, so she seems the most relatable at first. However, she was rarely the focus of the story, her role reduced to a Kevin Hart in a movie starring The Rock, basically the comedic relief. This was often dumbed down to a phrase in the spirit of,
"I used to be a barista for 3 months at Starbucks, so I know how to do a double latte macchiato,"
which was conveniently brought up at a place where the team desperately needed a double latte macchiato to escape some terrible fate. As one does. And while she had the potential to be an interesting, pleasantly sarcastic adage to the group, the way she was written into the story robbed her of all depth. Can you believe that even though we meet literal demons in this book, the darkest, most dangerous enemies of humankind are actually elves? Not that kind, that kind. Proclaimed as abominations by the church, these creatures are an endless threat to civilized Europe. They inhabit the far northeast of the map, and whether that was the goal or not, the social critique of current events cannot be ignored, although I doubt it's entirely intentional. So here we have Sunny, an elf, the living proof that they're not all bad, bringing invisibility and the straightforward theme of social injustice to the group, both very useful if you're trying to catch a wider audience of readers, by the way. Aside from having some overlap with Baptiste in terms of her role in the party, Sunny was trying a little too hard to sell the "it's not all straightforward good and bad" theme, while managing to be entirely good in contrast with all the other elves being portrayed as entirely bad, which is my entire problem with this whole theme. The argument is exactly the same, you just switched the two sides. She also could have been a great character had she been more than just a misunderstood victim who's good at everything. And it didn't help that her storyline also contributed to the way too YA romancy flavor of the story. The other devil we never see as a point of view is the vampire Baron Rickard, who, even though being a part of the group, spends more than half of the book in the literal background and we rarely see him on page. He conveniently emerges only in the most stickiest of situations, always a tad younger and refreshed after a good drink, and always ready to save the day with his frankly overpowered ability to nudge people towards any action he wishes, which more often than not ends up being voluntary self-deletion. Throughout the entire book, I had the feeling that Joe Abercrombie used him as more of a trump card rather than a full-fledged character, a vampire ex machina, if you will. Which is really disappointing because there was room for a very interesting character there. Also, how many of you think of dumplings every time you see the word vampire now? I wonder if it's just me. Viva was something else. She managed to be both entertaining following the overall tone of the story and interesting to explore as a character despite that same tone. Unlike the other devils I mentioned up until now, who started off compelling but managed to become more and more predictable as the story unfolded, Viva was the opposite. She started off as a monstrous werewolf, one you can count on to transform and mess everyone up as the scene escalates, but quickly managed to prove herself to be way more than what appeared on the surface. Her very interesting, rather dark backstory and her fascinating inner torment, kept fresh by the attention span of a goldfish, made her chapters compulsively readable, and other adverbs. In addition, her eliminate or fornicate attitude was a front for an ever-growing pile of regrets, stranded on shoulders too tired to bear it. Truly a character worthy of the author, and one of the two that actually stuck with me. Of course, I saved the best for last, as dramatic effect seems most fitting for Balthazar Sham Ivam Draxi, one of Europe's top necromantic minds, depending on who you ask. It is no surprise that the most Abercrombie-esque character is the one that I actually fell in love with in a Joe Abercrombie book. Balthazar is arrogant beyond belief, grotesquely self-serving, completely devoid of self-awareness, and so much fun. His constant attempts to escape his fate fit the overall quirky tone of the story, but also managed to mix things up at the exact points where the book was on the verge of becoming a slog. And while he failed to walk the path of humility, his overdramatic way of handling misery while growing in a not too obvious but pleasing way was probably the most entertaining aspect of the book. While the formula of an interesting setting mixed with characters with potential for development was there, the latter were sadly reduced to catchphrases, some entertaining banter, and some successful dynamics between the different pairs in the group. But in the case of Joe Abercrombie, this just doesn't cut it, because we don't love Logan Ninefingers only because he repeats, "You can never have too many knives," anytime he gets the chance to. Or at least that's not why I love him. Strong characters want something, fear something, hide secrets, grow when they lose, believe lies, and then learn truths. Ask yourself, what did Baptiste or Baron Ricker want or fear? Great characters create friction, raise the stakes, or offer insight. Did Alex do any of that for like 90% of the book? Did Brother Diaz? Did Sonny? Did Jacob? So the pickle in which we find a ragtag group of abominations is not something revolutionary, but frankly, it doesn't need to be. Moreover, this is the first book in a series, so it is to be expected that a relatively big part of it will be dedicated to the introduction of the characters and the unveiling of the world. It starts off as a standard escort mission from point A to point B with the promise, nay the hope, that whatever could go wrong will go wrong for the sake of the characters' development and the reader's amusement, and for a while the book does just that. The first quarter of it or so is nothing short of exciting. However, after a while, the story enters a repetitive frame of events so obvious that even the author makes fun of it. The overcoming of Alex's four cousins was especially guilty in this particular aspect. It always starts in the exact same way, with changing of the scenery, which from a world-building point of view actually manages to keep the reader engaged. Then we meet some new allies and or enemies before the main bad guy shows up, demonstrates his dark powers, and then the devils proceed to kick his ass all the way to the moon, but always by the skin of their teeth, and always in the most generically epic way. Rinse, repeat. The local mini-quests particularly annoyed me because often they not only didn't help progress the main plot, but actually helped delay it. They were a spectacle each time, I'll give you that, but they felt disconnected and more like a distraction. The guy and the lady in Serbia? What? What was the point of that? The final part of the book tries to break that cycle by changing the pace a little bit and throwing a ton of plot twists at the reader, most of which sadly fall flat because they lack the necessary build-up in order to have any impact. Some are predictable, some are not, but again, there are so many of them and they come so easily that it's hard for you to actually get invested. I mean, why would you care about the fate of a secondary character you just met, be they friend or enemy? And while the switching between points of view helped all, or at least some of the devils shine in one situation or another, it was messy in all the wrong ways, often leaving me wondering who's the actual point of view right now. This was especially true in the cases where the author tried to give us eyes everywhere by rapidly switching between points of view, much like he did in some of the more tense chapters of The First Law and Age of Madness, where the next character would pick up where the previous one leaves off, creating sort of a chain scene. This is somewhat successful when the devils are fighting, but becomes so confusing when they're not, because they'd often have very different circumstances and locations which don't become immediately clear, so I'd often have to read through a paragraph or even more in order to catch up to whomever I'm following. Pacing and mood were also all over the place, especially in the instances where we had part of the points of view battling and the other part fondling each other romantically, if you know what I mean. Because the tone shift is so abrupt, I wasn't sure whether I'm supposed to be biting my nails or touching my... This led to me losing the thread, so to speak, on more than one chapter where the sense of urgency due to mortal peril was overshadowed by teenagers trying to decide whether they like each other or not. And in general, I'd say this is one of my biggest issues with the book, the tonal dissonance throughout it. All the potential for a greedy, dark, meaningful story was repeatedly diluted by the forceful shoving of a good old funky time in the most inappropriate moments, the incessant desire to turn everything into jokes, and high school-esque, quasi-romantical trepidations. The Devils is a mess. It starts off with a dark undertone and troubled characters, but the pain and the villains just aren't there to offer them proper opportunities for growth and development, so all they're left with at the end is becoming catchphrase-wielding main dudes in an action flick. And the main problem is our main characters are basically superheroes who always have a supernatural trick up their sleeve. So with very few exceptions, pretty much no growth is required for the difficulties to be overcome, and as such, pretty much no growth is observed. Twists are cheap as they come too early and they go too early, and the consequences of them are resolved pretty much instantaneously. And isn't that the biggest indictment of modern storytelling? Everything is made to look super dramatic, but there's no real pain. I mean, everybody wants you to gasp in shock, but nobody wants to kill Ned Stark. Or maybe they've just forgotten how to. And now, after all the bitching and moaning I did, you think I didn't enjoy the book, but I will admit I was entertained. And had it had any other author's name on the cover, I would have likely regarded it way higher. But it didn't have another author's name. It was this one. Now I know that Joe Abercrombie is not everybody's cup of tea, but he was my cup of tea. The way that he wrote the first law books, that was so rare. I haven't yet found another author who can deliver that type of story with that type of voice. It's a special flavor and I was waiting for it, but I didn't get that flavor. Instead, I got a good story, but it's good like a lot of other stories are good. There's nearly nothing unique about it. It's fun and cinematic, and I'm sure it will appeal to a wide variety of readers because this is what it's supposed to do, to cover every quirk and theme, to provide loud spectacle, to shock but not too much, and likely to make good TV. But I wanted something else. I want my Joe Abercrombie characters to suffer in hell while on their way to another more hellish hell, and to be easier to like for it, while continuing to be pillars of humanity's worst. I want them to be asking themselves, how did we get here, instead of,
does she want to kiss me again?
I want to be made to think, not made to forget. It is a great success for Joe Abercrombie that the book was picked up by none other than James Cameron for a big screen adaptation, but this also has me wondering whether the book was always intended as Hollywood bait more than actual work of literature. Either way, I don't begrudge the author the desire to reach a wider audience. I mean, who doesn't want that? Moreover, I didn't hate the book. I gave it a high rating because it didn't deserve a lower one, but I also didn't love it because it wasn't the signature Abercrombie. The Abercrombie that I love doesn't tell you who to root for, but rather makes you question yourself for liking someone who's like the worst person you can ever imagine. He gives you a world that's just as terrible and fascinating as our own, and just so happens to have magic in it, dishing it out sparsely so it remains precious and mysterious. He forces you to reckon with the futility of power, the reality of violence, and the seduction of charisma, and he does it slowly and methodically, so his point is not too obvious from paragraph 2. What he writes is brutal, brilliant, and surprisingly human, where even the heroes are monsters in the making, and the monsters might have a point. He doesn't comfort you, he confronts you. And it might sound whiny and entitled to cry about a good book not being good the way I want it. Sure, but I can find 1,000 books that are good like The Devils. Hell, I could probably find 1,000,000, yet I can't find another book that's like Joe Abercrombie's previous works, that has his signature goodness to it. This thing that he provided, it was unique and special, and now it's gone. And I mourn it. So that is why, 2 months after I finished it, I am still upset with a book to which I gave 4 out of 5 stars.